My father pointed at me across Thanksgiving dinner and barked, "You're grounded until you apologize to your brother." I was 41. 23 relatives stared, then laughed. My face burned so hot I felt it in my ears, but I only said one word, "All right." The next morning, Dad climbed upstairs and sneered, "Finally learned your place." Then he opened my door. The bed was made, the closet was empty, my suitcase was gone. Before he could call me, the front door slammed downstairs. Our family lawyer rushed in shaking, looked at Dad and whispered, "Sir, what have you done?" But he wasn't asking about me. 2 weeks earlier, before Thanksgiving turned into the night, I stopped asking my family for permission to exist. My grandmother Evelyn died on a Tuesday morning. She was 88 sharp until the end, and the only person in my family who never treated my feelings like a defect. I'm Claire Harper. I was 41, then working as an interior designer, living on my own, paying my own bills, handling clients who trusted me with six-figure renovations. None of that mattered to my father. To Richard Harper, I was still the daughter who felt too much. My brother Jason was 44, a financial consultant polished enough to make arrogance look professional. Dad trusted him with everything: money, decisions, family plans. If Jason said something, Dad called it practical. If I said the same thing, Dad called it emotional. Mom Susan was different. She was warm, thoughtful, and careful with everyone's feelings, except her own. She had spent years as a school counselor helping other families talk through hard things. At home, though, she survived Dad by keeping the peace. That silence cost more than she understood. Grandma Evelyn was the opposite. When I was 17, I told Dad I wanted to study design. He stared at me across the kitchen table and said, "You always choose with your feelings." I remember leaving the room before he could see me cry. Grandma found me behind her house, kneeling beside a row of peonies she had planted that spring. She handed me a small garden shovel and said, "Some things grow without anybody's permission." I never forgot that. After she died, her house smelled like coffee, furniture polish, and the cinnamon hand cream she kept beside her chair. Her mug was still near the sink. A grocery list was clipped to the refrigerator. Half the family acted busy because standing still made grief harder. Dad moved faster than anyone. By Thursday, he had collected keys, stacked papers in the study, and started answering questions nobody had asked him. "I'll handle it," he kept saying. Bills, insurance, banking. Anything connected to Grandma suddenly passed through him. I stayed in the upstairs guest room for a couple of weeks to help Mom prepare for Thanksgiving and sort through Grandma's belongings. Everyone still called it Claire's room because I had slept there during summers as a teenager. One afternoon, I walked past the study and saw Jason coming out with a thick stack of financial papers tucked against his chest. He stopped when he saw me. For half a second, neither of us spoke. "What's that?" I asked. Jason gave me the smooth little smile he used when he wanted a conversation to end. "Nothing you need to worry about." Then he walked past me. And for the first time since Grandma died, grief wasn't the only thing tightening my chest. Because Grandma had always told me one thing about money: when someone says not to worry, that is usually when you should start paying attention. Thanksgiving arrived wrapped in the kind of normal that makes you question your own instincts. By noon, Grandma's house was full. Coats hung over dining chairs. Someone had brought a pumpkin pie from the grocery store. The kitchen smelled like turkey butter coffee and the expensive perfume Aunt Diane always wore too heavily. 23 relatives moved through the rooms laughing louder than usual, as if noise could cover what was missing. Grandma's chair by the window stayed empty. Dad took his usual place at the head of the table. Jason sat 2 seats away from him. I noticed them exchanging looks before dinner even started. Small looks, quick ones, the kind people think nobody sees. At one point, Jason disappeared into the study with Dad. When he came back, he had the same financial papers I'd seen days earlier. I waited until we were clearing plates. "Jason, why are you handling Grandma's financial papers?" He stopped. Conversation around us softened. "I'm helping Dad." "Did Grandma ask you to?" His jaw tightened. "Claire, not everything is a conspiracy. I didn't say it was. You're implying I'm doing something wrong. I'm asking who gave you authority." That was when Dad stepped in. He set his wine glass down hard enough to make the silverware jump. "Enough." I turned toward him. He didn't look angry yet. That was worse. Dad's calm voice had always been the one he used when he wanted everyone else to feel unreasonable. "Jason understands financial matters," he said. "You don't. I understand enough to know Grandma had an attorney. You're grieving. So are you." His eyes narrowed. Around us, people suddenly became very interested in their plates. Jason leaned back and sighed like I was embarrassing him. "Just apologize, Claire, for asking a question, for accusing me. I didn't accuse you." Dad's chair scraped against the floor. He stood. The room went still. For the first time that day, his voice rose. "You're grounded until you apologize to your brother." There was one beat of silence. Then someone laughed. Another person followed. A cousin covered his mouth. One of my uncles shook his head like Dad had made the joke of the night. Soon the whole room seemed filled with laughter. I was 41 years old. I had my own home, my own career, my own life, and my father had just reduced me to a disobedient teenager in front of everyone I grew up with. Heat climbed from my chest into my face, my ears burned. Under the table, I pressed my fingernails into my palms so hard it hurt. Then I looked at Mom. She didn't laugh. That almost made it worse. She lowered her eyes and folded her napkin. She chose silence. Something inside me went strangely quiet. I looked back at Dad. "All right, one word." He smiled because he thought he had won. I finished my coffee. I helped carry 2 plates into the kitchen. Then I went upstairs, closed the door to the room everyone still called mine, and pulled my suitcase from the closet. By midnight, I was driving toward a motel near the interstate with Grandma's recipe box on the passenger seat. The laughter followed me for miles. But somewhere between the house and that motel, the question in my head changed. I stopped wondering how to make them understand me. I started wondering why I still needed their permission. That question scared me more than Dad. The motel room was colder than it looked. The vent under the window hummed all night, pushing dry air across the bedspread. Headlights from the interstate kept sliding over the ceiling. I sat on the edge of the mattress with my coat still on and Grandma's recipe box beside me. For almost an hour, I did nothing. Then I cried. Not because of the house, not because of the money. I cried because 23 people had watched my father humiliate me, and not one of them had said, "That's enough." Even Mom had looked away. That hurt more than Dad's words. Around 2 in the morning, I opened Grandma's recipe box because I needed something familiar. Her handwriting was everywhere. Apple pie, chicken soup, cornbread, notes in the margins about adding more cinnamon or using less salt. I pulled out the old notebook underneath. The bottom of the box shifted. I froze. There was a thin envelope hidden beneath a false cardboard lining. My name was written across the front. Claire. My hand started shaking. Inside was a short letter. Grandma didn't mention money. She didn't list property. She didn't explain anything in detail. She only told me that if Dad ever started making decisions after she was gone, I needed to contact Thomas Reed immediately. Then came one sentence I read 3 times. "Your father respects paper only when paper can stop him." At 7 the next morning, I called Thomas. He didn't sound surprised. "Come in," he said. "Now." His office was quiet, almost painfully ordinary. Beige walls, cold coffee, a clock ticking above a filing cabinet. Thomas closed the door and placed several stacks of papers in front of me. He showed me Grandma's trust, the house, her savings, the lake cottage. Everything had been arranged years earlier. Mom had her own protected share. Jason had his. And I was the primary beneficiary of the house and several other assets. Dad had no authority to take control. Thomas explained it slowly, making sure grief wasn't turning every sentence into noise. Grandma had not acted impulsively. Witnesses had been involved. Her instructions were consistent. There was no missing signature, no last-minute change, no loophole Dad could simply claim. I should have felt relieved. Instead, Thomas pulled out another set of correspondence. Emails, requests, notes about delaying distributions. Dad knew exactly what Grandma had decided. So did Jason. They had discussed challenging my influence over her and dragging the process out long enough for me to get tired, embarrassed, or scared enough to walk away. I stared at the page until the words blurred. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't grief. It was a plan. Thomas asked, "What do you want to do?" For the first time in my life, the answer came easily. I want Grandma's wishes followed, nothing more. Thomas studied me for a second, then stood and reached for his coat. They expected me to return and apologize. Instead, I was going back with the one man who already knew the truth. Mom told me later what happened during the first 30 seconds because I was still outside with Thomas. Dad went upstairs just after 8. He stopped in front of the guest room and knocked once. "Finally learned your place." No answer. He opened the door. The bed was made. The closet was nearly empty. My suitcase was gone. Grandma's recipe box was gone too. Mom said Dad stood there for several seconds staring like the room itself had insulted him. Then the front door opened downstairs. Thomas Reed walked in first. I followed him. Dad came down fast, already irritated. "What is this?" Thomas had a folder in one hand. It was trembling slightly. Not because he was afraid, because he was furious. He looked straight at Dad. "Sir, what have you done?" The room changed. Jason was at the kitchen counter with coffee. Mom stood near the sink. Aunt Diane had stayed overnight and was sitting in Grandma's chair. Nobody moved. Dad gave Thomas the same dismissive smile he used on me. "I'm handling my mother's affairs." "No," Thomas said. "You are interfering with them." The only sound was the refrigerator humming behind us. Dad glanced at Mom, then Jason, searching for the agreement he was used to getting. Nobody gave it to him. Thomas laid the first page on the dining table and tapped it once with his finger. His voice stayed calm, which somehow made every word land harder. You knew she had made these arrangements. Dad's face tightened. Thomas opened the folder. I explained that Grandma's trust had been created years earlier, while she was fully competent with independent witnesses and clear instructions. Dad interrupted. "She was influenced." Thomas turned one page. "No." He showed correspondence proving Grandma's plan existed long before her health declined. The house was protected. Her savings were protected. The lake cottage was protected. Mom had her share. Jason had his. And Dad had no authority to appoint himself manager of any of it. Jason set his coffee down. Dad pointed at me. "She put this in her head." Thomas looked at him. "Richard Clare did not create this plan. Evelyn did." Then he opened the second stack. That was when Jason's face changed. Thomas summarized the recent emails and requests. Dad and Jason had discussed delaying distributions, questioning my influence over Grandma, and creating enough friction that I might eventually give up. Mom covered her mouth. Aunt Diane stood. "You knew what Evelyn wanted." Dad ignored her. I looked at Jason. "You knew." He rubbed his jaw. "Claire, it wasn't like that. 3 words would have been enough." "No, I didn't." He couldn't say them, Thomas continued. He explained that the house Dad had treated like his own was still part of Grandma's estate plan and would pass according to the trust once administration was complete. Dad actually laughed. A short, dry sound. "This is still the family home." I felt something in me settle, not anger, clarity. That's exactly why Grandma refused to let one person control it. His eyes snapped toward me. "You have no idea what you're doing." There it was, the old voice. The one that had followed me since I was 17. Too emotional, too sensitive, not practical enough. For years I had answered that voice with explanations. This time I didn't. "I don't need you to agree with me anymore." Dad went silent, not defeated in some dramatic way. Just suddenly smaller. Thomas closed the folder. Nobody laughed. Nobody looked away. And for the first time in my life, Dad was standing in a room full of family without controlling what happened next. That was when I realized the house was never the real inheritance. The real inheritance was the moment I stopped handing him authority he had never earned. The weeks after that morning were quieter than I expected. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown, no police cars, no shouting match on the front lawn. Just paperwork meetings, signatures, and the slow collapse of a story Dad had been telling for years. Thomas handled the trust exactly the way Grandma had intended. Dad tried to challenge parts of it. Jason asked questions through his own attorney. But the documents were clear, the timeline was clean, and Grandma's decisions had been made long before anyone could claim confusion or pressure. The trust held, the property plan stood, and the assets were distributed the way she wanted. Jason still received the share Grandma had left him. Mom kept hers. I didn't touch a dollar that wasn't meant for me. That mattered, because I didn't want justice to turn me into Dad. When the house officially passed to me, I gave him time to move out. Weeks, not hours. I told him he could take his personal things, arrange storage, and leave without an audience. He stared at me like kindness was somehow more insulting than anger. "You think this makes you better than me?" I shook my head. "No, I think it makes me different." That was the last real conversation we had. Dad moved into a condo across town. He never came back for Thanksgiving, and I never asked him to. Aunt Diane later said the family finally understood what had happened. I told her understanding was only the beginning. A few months later, Jason called and asked to meet. We sat in a coffee shop across town. He looked tired, less polished. For once, he didn't have the right expression ready. "I thought I was protecting the family," he said. I looked at him for a long time. "Would you have told me the truth if Thomas hadn't found those messages?" Jason opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at his coffee. That silence told me everything. I didn't yell. I didn't forgive him either. Trust is not a family heirloom. You don't get it back because you miss having it. By spring, the house felt different. Not because I changed everything. I didn't. I kept Grandma's chair by the window. I kept the old recipe box in the kitchen. I left the little scratch on the dining table where she once dropped a roasting pan and laughed until she cried. One Saturday morning, Mom came over carrying 2 coffees. She stood on the porch longer than she needed to. "I'm sorry," she said. I waited. She swallowed. "Not for your father. For me." I saw what was happening and I stayed quiet. That was the apology I had needed. I stepped aside. "Come in." We didn't fix 20 years in one morning. We drank coffee. We talked. Then we went outside and worked in Grandma's garden. By May, the peonies were opening. I still worked as an interior designer. I still had difficult clients, deadlines, groceries, laundry, ordinary life. But something inside me had changed. For months, I kept Grandma's letter in my desk and read it whenever doubt came back. Eventually, I stopped needing to. The house was never proof that I had won. The money wasn't either. The proof was simpler. When Dad's voice appeared in my head saying I was too emotional, too difficult, too much, I no longer answered him. I trusted myself instead. And that freedom was worth more than anything Grandma could have left me. Family love should never require you to surrender your voice just to keep the peace. Setting a boundary isn't cruelty, and walking away isn't failure. I didn't win because I got Grandma's house. I won because I stopped letting my father decide what I was worth. That spring, standing beside Mom in Grandma's garden, I finally understood what Evelyn had tried to teach me years ago. Some things grow without permission. If you've ever had to protect yourself from your own family, share your story below and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.